Forget everything you think you know about Blackbeard's last stand. The truth is far darker than legend. There was no honorable duel aboard the Adventure, only a calculated ambush, planned in secret, executed in silence. Ocracoke Inlet, dawn, November 22nd, 1718. A single sloop rocks quietly in the shallow morning water. Aboard her stands a man who will soon carry 5 pistol balls and 20 saber cuts across his body. And still, for several minutes more, he will refuse to fall. His name is Edward Teach, called Blackbeard. But what they didn't know was who set the trap, and how carefully it had been baited. To understand that dawn, you must first understand the sea it happened on, brutal, lawless, and bleeding. The golden age of piracy had reached its violent peak, from Caribbean sugar islands to Carolina's marshy coast. The ports were blood-soaked and lawless. Bristol merchants counted their losses in ledgers thick as heavy Bibles.
Insurance houses in London whispered of ruin. Governors slept with loaded pistols beneath their pillows every restless night. The crown had placed a heavy bounty on every black flag that dared to rise above a mast. And no flag rose higher or was more feared than Teach's, a skull above crossed white bones. A horned devil holding an hourglass, driving a bloody spear into a bleeding heart on tattered black cloth. Sailors who saw it in the distance often struck their colors before a single shot was ever fired. That was the point. Terror was cheaper than gunpowder. Terror kept the powder dry beneath the black flag. But the myth of Blackbeard and the actual ledger of Edward Teach are two very different documents entirely. The myth, a towering giant with slow-burning fuses braided into his black beard, eyes wreathed in demonic smoke. The ledger is far quieter, a former English privateer, likely born and raised in the port of Bristol. A seaman turned sea-wolf beneath the older Captain Benjamin Hornigold, learning trade, negotiation, and colonial political weather firsthand. By 1718, he had captured a French slaver off Martinique, renaming her the dread Queen Anne's Revenge. He mounted 40 guns along her sides, then blockaded Charleston Harbor for a week, ransoming an entire colony. He held the port hostage over a single chest of medicine, an empire brought low by mere fever. He grounded that great ship on a sandbar off North Carolina. Accident, some claimed, others cold, cunning design. He vanished into the salt marshes with the finest of his men and the richest of his plunder. The stakes were empire itself, sugar, slaves, and the trade winds. One captain could bleed a colony white. The empire had decided the bleeding would stop. It had chosen its executioner, Lieutenant Robert Maynard, Royal Navy.
Yet here lies the paradox that most tellings quietly hide. When Maynard sailed south, Teach was legally pardoned. Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina had granted him the king's own mercy. The wolf now wore respectability. Teach had settled quietly in Bathtown, married a planter's daughter, so the story runs, and kept house. He kept company with officials, moored a sloop called the Adventure at Ocracoke Inlet, on paper fully retired. In practice, the black flag had never come down. He still took ships, still stashed plunder among the reeds. He still hosted other captains, Charles Vane among them, in drunken councils on the sandbanks of Ocracoke. Rum flowed, deals were struck. Corrupt officials of North Carolina took their quiet share and looked the other way. North Carolina had become a sanctuary, intolerable to the men who ruled the colony next door. Alexander Spotswood, lieutenant governor of Virginia, was a soldier by training, a politician by necessity. He detested pirates. He detested Charles Eden more. He believed, with some evidence, that his neighbor was sheltering a wolf. Without informing North Carolina, without asking the Admiralty in London, Spotswood drafted a secret warrant against Blackbeard. He raised funds from his own pocket and Virginia's coffers, then hired 2 shallow draft sloops for the hunt. He turned to Royal Navy vessels in the James River and requested volunteers. The order was quiet, direct. Find Edward Teach at Ocracoke. Kill him if he will not surrender. Bring back his head as proof. 2 sloops slipped south from the Chesapeake. No colors, no warning, no mercy expected on either side. The command fell to Lieutenant Robert Maynard of His Majesty's ship Pearl. He was not a famous officer.
He would not have been famous in any other November of any other year. He was competent and patient. Known among fellow lieutenants as a man who wrote careful letters and kept careful accounts of every duty. He took 35 men from the Pearl. He took 25 more from the Lime, 60 in all, split across 2 hired sloops, the Jane, which he took as his own, and the Ranger under Master Hyde. The sloops carried muskets, pistols, cutlasses, boarding pikes, and grenadoes. They did not carry cannon at all. This was deliberate. Where they were going, the water was too shallow for a frigate to follow safely. Deep holes would ground and die on the sandbars. Only shallow holes could hunt in those waters. Aboard the Adventure, Edward Teach had 19 men. Some were hardened veterans of the Queen Anne's Revenge. Some were freedmen. Some were runaways. 6 of the 19, by careful later record, were black sailors.
Men who had traded one form of servitude for another, more violent, more equal, and more free. Teach trusted them completely. He had been drinking hard the night before, entertaining a merchant trader from Bath. He told the visitor with a grin that he was expecting no trouble at all that morning. The truth is, his own crew was thin. Most fighting men were ashore, scattered through Ocracoke taverns, sleeping off the last week of celebration in the huts of Bath, drunk on rum and easy victory. Rum, gunpowder, and old grievance sat side by side on the Adventure's deck, unattended and quietly waiting. It was the calm before Ocracoke. And under the black flag, it would not last much longer. At first light on November 22nd, the sloop Adventure spotted strange sails inshore. Maynard had come at dawn. Now hold that image, because everything that follows has been rewritten 100 times in ballads and later films. The myth insists on a fair duel. 2 captains, 2 crews, 2 sea nations meeting on open decks bravely. The myth is a comfort. The myth is a lie. The truth is a naval trap, cold and precise. Maynard had already seen how thin Teach's numbers were the night before, and had counted the pirates' men. He knew he outnumbered them 3-1, but Blackbeard's greatest weapon was never powder or cold steel. It was fear. Fear that made grown men freeze. Fear that made ardent seamen forget their careful drill. So Maynard did what no honorable captain in a ballad would ever do. He turned his deck into bait. He ordered nearly every man aboard the Jane below into the hold, leaving only himself and the helmsman above. To any pirate glancing across the water, the Jane would look already broken. A prize, empty, silent, easy. Fortune, they say, favored the ruthless. And for many long years, fortune had indeed favored Edward Teach himself. But not on this dawn. The deck he was about to step onto was already a waiting grave, dug by an officer who had studied him far more carefully than any friend Blackbeard had ever known. Before the boarding came the battle in the water. It began at short pistol range, in confusion and blood. The Adventure was moored in shallow water when the 2 sloops came for her. Teach cut his cable. He tried to run, not out to sea, but through a narrow channel Maynard did not know. His men worked the sails. Muskets began to crack from both decks. Powder smoke drifted low across the water. Somewhere in that first exchange, the ranger swung too close and took a full broadside from the adventurer's guns. Teach had loaded them not with round shot, but with a hurricane of iron scraps, nails, and old langrage. It swept the ranger's deck like a scythe. Master Hyde fell wounded. His second in command fell dead beside him. 6 sailors dropped where they stood. The ranger drifted away, crippled, half her crew screaming or silent. In less than a minute, one of the 2 sloops sent against Blackbeard was already out of the fight. Now only the Jane remained. Here Teach made his mistake, or his gamble, difficult to say which. He turned his guns on Maynard's sloop and fired again, sweeping her deck as he had swept the Ranger's. But the Jane's deck was almost empty. There was no one there to kill. The bait had held. Then came the grenados. Not modern explosives, bottles and hollowed iron, packed with gunpowder, small shot and glass. Fitted with burning hemp fuses, Teach's men led them along the rail. They arced across the narrow gap. They shattered on the Jane's planking. Smoke burst upward in choking clouds, blinding both decks in an instant. In that smoke, Teach saw what he wanted to see. A ship with no crew standing, a prize taken. The Adventure grounded softly on the sandbar. Teach ordered his boarding party across, and he himself went first. Through the smoke and drifting powder stink, the giant himself climbed aboard the Jane, over 6 feet tall. He wore a heavy blue coat, a bandolier of pistols across his chest, a blade in each hand. His beard, black and matted, hung down almost to his belt, and behind him came only 14 men. The rest of his crew had fallen, or worked the Adventure's guns, or lay bleeding on her deck. Teach had brought fewer than a dozen fighters aboard the Jane. He believed the ship was already his. And that is precisely when Maynard sprang the trap. The hatches of the Jane burst open below. From the hold came 50 seamen of the Royal Navy, cutlasses out, pistols cocked, screaming as they charged. In an instant, the empty deck became a mass of blue coats and bared steel. Teach did not run. He would never run. He raised his pistol and fired at Maynard, but the ball went wide. Maynard fired back. His pistol ball struck Teach in the body, yet it did not stop him. They closed with cutlasses. Blade met blade. Sparks. The 2 men were not equally matched in reach. Teach was the larger man, and by every account the stronger. His blade came down like thunder. His stroke shattered Maynard's guard, snapping the lieutenant's cutlass near the hilt. Maynard fell back a step. Teach raised his weapon high above the fallen lieutenant, poised for the killing stroke that would end everything. Behind Teach, unseen in the smoke and press, a Highland Scot of the Royal Navy moved silently in. One of Maynard's spur men, his name unrecorded, his broadsword raised behind the pirate's exposed neck. He swung once. The blade did not sever the head, but it opened the giant's throat crimson. Teach turned. He was still standing. He was still fighting. Blood ran down his coat in sheets. He drew another pistol. He tried to cock it. His fingers would not close on the steel. Struck again. Then again. Then again. Musket balls, cutlass thrusts, boarding pikes rained down upon him. He went down at last onto the bloody deck of the Jane, his own weapons scattered around him. Later, they counted 5 pistol balls buried in his flesh, and 20 saber cuts across his body. Anyone, later surgeons said, would have killed a lesser man, yet Blackbeard had taken them all. Until the throat cut, until the last musket ball, until his own body, at last, refused him. The myth would call it a duel. The ledger would call it what it truly was: ambush. An ambush executed with cold precision, and what Maynard did next would define the legend forever. He ordered the head cut from the body, then lashed by the beard to the bowsprit itself. The body they threw over the side into the shallow grey water of Ocracoke Inlet at dawn. Legend swears it swam 3 times around the sloop, but the truth, no one recovered the corpse. Maynard sailed north with his trophy at the bow, Teach's head swinging blackened by salt and sun. He carried it up the James River, then to Bath, then to Williamsburg, where Spotswood was waiting for proof. The bounty was paid. The head, by one account, was later mounted on a pole at Hampton River. It stood there for years as a warning. Sailors call that place Blackbeard's Point, and some still do. The surviving members of Teach's crew were taken to Williamsburg in chains. 15 men were tried, 13 were hanged. Their bodies were left on the gibbets along the road, another warning offered to another generation of sailors. One spared man, a black sailor named Caesar, had been trusted by Teach to blow the powder magazine. He was overpowered before he could strike the match to detonate the ship. He was hanged all the same. Spotswood's political victory was sealed. He had violated the borders of a neighboring colony without royal authority. In the strictest sense, he had committed an act of illegal war, but he had killed Blackbeard. In the ports of London and Bristol, that was enough. Merchants breathed easier, insurance rates quietly adjusted. The pardons offered a year earlier began to look, in hindsight, like a trap of their own design. A way to bring pirates into the sunlight, to name them, to know them, and to kill them. That is the truth behind the myth of the duel. Not two captains meeting as equals on open sea, but a governor, a lieutenant, a hidden crew, a baited deck, and a Highland blade coming from behind. Blackbeard did not lose to a better swordsman. He lost to a better plan drawn in colonial ink. But the head on the bowsprit was only the beginning. With Teach's death, the tide of piracy broke, not all at once, not overnight, but the direction of the Atlantic had turned against the Black Flag. Charles Vane would be captured within a year. Calico Jack Rackham would swing in Jamaica in 1720. Bartholomew Roberts, the greatest raider of them all, was shot down off the African coast in 1722. His crew was tried en masse in the largest pirate trial in history. 52 of them hanged in chains. The Royal Navy expanded its patrols. The colonial gallows filled and refilled. Pardons kept coming. So did executions. Within 7 years of Ocracoke, the black flag over the Atlantic had become rare. Within 10, almost gone. And here the empire faced a strange problem. The pirates it had crushed were too useful to forget. They had been terrifying, but now they were dead. They could be reshaped, softened, sold as legend. So the London printers went to work. Within 1 year of Teach's death, a strange new book appeared. A general history of the robberies and murders of the most notorious pirates, published under Captain Charles Johnson. Nobody has ever been certain who Johnson really was. Some say Daniel Defoe, some say a hack journalist. What matters is that the book was a sensation, devoured by readers hungry for the legend of pirates. It described Blackbeard with lit fuses smoking in his beard. It gave him 14 wives, 1 per port. It reshaped the ambush at Ocracoke into a heroic duel. And the book sold, and sold, and sold. Penny Dreadfuls invented the gentleman pirate. Silver-tongued, well-dressed, doomed but noble. A figure never truly born of the sea. Hollywood, 2 centuries later, took that figure and gave him a parrot, peg-leg, and rum bottle. The Blackbeard of the ledger, Bristol seaman with political shrewdness and a taste for terror, vanished beneath the myth. The empire allowed it. More than allowed, it needed the myth, because a myth is safer than a memory. Myth belongs to storybooks and taverns. Memory would remind sailors that 3 men with guns once took the seas. For a few brief years, ordinary men with grievances took the seas from kings and companies, a dangerous lesson. A lesson the crown preferred to bury with the bones at Blackbeard's Point, beneath silt and salt warp timbers. So the giant with the burning beard entered legend, and the calculating captain who blockaded Charleston was quietly forgotten. The duel replaced the ambush. The demon replaced the man. Every generation met Blackbeard in the mirror of fears. Devil, rebel, monster, romantic ghost. Rarely the seaman he was, rarely the corpse on the deck of the Jane. Counted in 5 pistol balls and 20 saber cuts, killed by men who cheated once and would cheat again. One captain fell at Ocracoke, another was already raising the black flag beyond the horizon, the golden age unfinished.
To know how the next great pirate met his end, the next voyage is already waiting on the channel. How the hunter who replaced Maynard tracked Bartholomew Roberts across Africa and killed the deadliest captain of the age. Join the crew, set sail with us, subscribe and raise the black flag. More stories wait beneath the waves. The tide is only beginning to turn. Under the black flag